You're watching Bridge to Faith, the program that helps bridges between the faiths, helps us to understand what faith is, why it's important, and what we can do about it. In today's program, we're going to be talking about the subject of belief when it comes to something called evolution and something called creation. And what a better place to do it than right here in South Africa at one of the national parks called Little Falls. I'm your host, Yusuf Estes, and I'd like to invite you to go along with me today as we explore the past and the present and consider the future here on Bridge to Faith. During our program today, we'll have the opportunity to explore something else, the Arabic language, using the English that we already know. Be sure to visit our website at bridgetofaith.com. And now let's get started with our program today, Bridge to Faith. Well, here we are, Little Falls. We're on one of the many bridges here. What we want to talk about today is the subject of evolution versus creation. When we look to the things that surround us, do we see something that just simply evolved from nothing? Or do we observe actually that, in fact, there are many things that indicate to us the proof of something bigger than us creating all that we see? Good question, isn't it? What's the answer? Well, those who subscribe to the belief of Mr. Charles Darwin would have you believe that we all basically came from monkeys. Well, that really makes you wonder, why do we still have monkeys? Another consideration for us is, if everything happened by chance, why is there so much order throughout the universe? Why is it that everywhere we look, we see order? We see something that obviously has design. Let us consider the plants and the trees, the animals, all of the things that we see around us every day. Where could these things have come from if it was only by accident? And if there was something that just blew up, wouldn't that be more like chaos rather than order? Wouldn't we observe actually more of the disorganization rather than the organization that we see every day? Here, there's a strange looking bird. I want you to take a look at this guy. Now, how is it that bird came out of the very same thing that I came out of, that you came out of? Does that make any sense to you? And how is it these birds can adapt to their environment? Isn't that an indication that there's more to it than just simple accidental evolution? Well, let's think about that. Many years ago, about 150 years ago, Charles Darwin came up with the idea that all the creation came about by an accident, and he could prove it by observing the various stages on development of different animals in general, and specifically a particular kind of bird called a finch. The finches that Charles Darwin was observing actually were on the island called the Galapagos. These were the Galapagos Islands, about 300 miles off the coast of Ecuador. And while he was there, he observed that these different birds each had beaks that were suited to their ecological niche, meaning that the birds that are living on the hard surfaces and they had to pull their food from between rocks, their beaks were just exactly right for that. While some of the birds on other islands where they were more like grasslands, their beaks were adjusted for that. Others that lived in trees, and their beaks on those birds were adjusted for that as well. Now, all of this indicated to him that this was a form of evolution, that they had evolved. Yet he didn't take into consideration, after all he was only an amateur anthropologist, he didn't take into consideration that all of these are existing at the same time. In addition to that, since then, in October of 1998, there was a documentary on the public access channels talking about what the effects were of El Nino. And perhaps you'll recall that the El Nino was a weather phenomenon wherein the changes of weather were the wrong time of the year, the water coming in at wrong time, temperatures at the wrong times, and so on. And what were some of the effects? One of the places they went was to the Galapagos Islands to determine what kind of effects these weather phenomena had caused. And you know what they found? They found that those same types of finches that were in the stories of Darwin many years before, they found that even though the structure of the ecological situation had changed drastically, when the birds hatched, their beaks had quote-unquote evolved, not in millions of years as Darwin had supposed, but in only 6 months. Only 6 months' time. When the babies hatched out, their beaks were already to adapt to the new environment that they found themselves in. You have to ask a question. How is that possible? Is this really evolution? Or is this something more of an intelligent design? Is this something coming from the creator of those birds in the first place? Well, of course, we will offer the opinion that there is a God, and we have faith in that. Consider this. In the Quran, Allah tells us that it is He who created the heavens and the earth, and it is He who stabilizes the earth by having the mountains going down deep, 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 with looks like tent pegs, or in Arabic, autad. He also tells us in the Quran about the place where the Bahrain, the two seas, come together, but they never really mix. He tells us also in the Quran about how it is that we get milk from a cow from the conjunction between the intestine and the blood. How is that someone could know this 1400 years ago when Louis Pasteur, I think he discovered this, what, 400 years ago? Who actually discovered it then? But we want to stay with our topic of talking about creation versus evolution. Within the creation that we look around, we do see things that evolve from one thing to another, but only in stages and only within the same species. For instance, we don't see giraffes turning into zebras. We don't see hippopotamuses turning into alligators. We don't see snakes turning into birds. Actually, what we see is transition in different stages. So, as we observe in the Quran, and Allah tells us very clearly, there is something called development that goes on, and Allah tells us He's the one who created it in the first place, but He's also the evolver. One of the names of Almighty Allah in the Quran is Al-Bari, and Al-Bari means the evolver. It is He who has created and He who has evolved. This comes to us 1400 years ago in the desert of Arabia. Can you imagine? Some of the things that Allah talks about in the Quran we can find right in front of us here in South Africa as well. The plants, the trees, the birds, the reptiles, so many of the things that we read about in the Quran, we now find that, wow, it's exactly how it is. And how could it be that somebody living in the desert, somebody illiterate, he didn't know how to read or write? Of course, I'm talking about none other than the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. How could it be that he came up with all of this? Well, this is exactly one of the things that we emphasize on Bridge to Faith. That you can have faith, but it should have proof. And one of the best proofs is to look around at the creation of Almighty God and realize that this did not come about by any accident. None of this happened by chance. In fact, I have to agree with those scientists. This is definitely intelligent design, isn't it? Let's take a break now and learn something about the Arabic language using the English that we already know. Coming up right here on Arabic in English within our program, Bridge to Faith. Well, now let's discover what we can find out about the Arabic language using the English that we already know. We're here in South Africa, and I think I'm going to try to do something we haven't done before on our program. And that is to take a stick like this one right here and do some drawing in the dirt and let you see how it would have been for people a long time ago. The folks here in Africa knew the Arabic language too, by the way. You might be surprised to find out that they started out by just taking a stick and drawing a straight line for the first sound. And they said, ah, and sometimes they said, oh, and sometimes they said, e. And that's the straight line that we today in Arabic call alif. Alif. The next sound they had was like this. Kind of looks like, look close at it now. What does that look like? Well, you might think, oh, I guess it kind of looks like the horns of a cow. And then let's put his head right underneath there. Horns of a cow. Head is here. All right. This picture is ba. And it happens to be the first letter of Baqarah. And Baqarah means a cow. How about that? Alif ba. And notice that this dot is below the line. I want to make another one similar to that one and see what you think of this. Okay, similar, but let's don't put anything here. Let's put a dot above. Now, the time here, right now in South Africa, happens to be noon. And guess where the sun is? It's straight above us. That's the sun up there, you see? And it's noontime, isn't it? So, when it's noontime, you would expect to see the sun be right up there. And that's it. And that is called noon, by the way. That's the name of this letter, noon. So we had a below, and we called it ba. And here at noontime, we called it noon. And it's pronounced noon. I'm going to draw another one now. Like this. This time I'll put two dots. That's ta. Ta. Ba. Noon. Ta. Now let's do one more. One more. And then we'll put three dots. See the dots? And we're going to do them like a little pyramid. There's the other one will be right there. Now what do you think that is? That's tha. Not for three. But it is tha. Tha. Three dots, tha. Two dots, ta. One dot up on top. At noontime, that's noon. And that one is ba. Can you imagine this? Now let's see what we got. Alif, ba, noon, ta, tha. Now in the order that they normally come, we have alif, ba, skip over, ta, tha, noon comes later. And let us have what's called the line of demarcation right about here. Now what we put above the line will be our characters. And let's put some characters here. Okay. And this is, we're just kind of making some notations here, going along, and making this and that. Not really worrying about it. But you see, now look, at the bottom here, this is the line of demarcation. Now whatever comes below that line, then we'll consider that to be a tail. Because some of the letters in Arabic language have tails. But if they connect to another letter, then the tail is gone, and it moves and connects then to the letter next to it. What are the letters that have tails? So let's consider that. We're going to start with this fresh, clear the dirt off here a little bit. Now watch this, watch. This is a letter called Ain. Can you say Ain? Well, you might say, we don't have a sound like that, but in Texas we do. We say, I ain't gonna do it. So this is the curve here at the top, kind of like this, and the big tail comes down to the bottom. But when it connects to something else, then the tail doesn't do that. It goes this way. See, huh? I suppose it had an aleph with it. That would be Ein Aleph. See that? Ein, Aleph. Pronounced ah, ah, ah. Got it? Let's do another one. Let's consider, for instance, now, the letter Sin. Sin has 3 points that come up. Then a tail comes down like this. See this tail down here? That's Sin. If it connects to another letter, then this tail would be gone. I'm going to erase it with my shoes. See that? And now let's connect it to another letter. Sin Aleph. Sa. Sa. Look at that. Now it has a sister letter called Sheen. Now let's go ahead and put the tail back down like this. 3 dots. 1, 2, 3. Got it? Now that's sh. And if we remove the tail, connect it now to the Aleph, it's Shah. Now had we connected it to some of the other letters, it would have a different sound, which we're going to be learning about more in the programs that come up. But just to give you a little taste of it, I'll remove the Aleph and connect it to the Wow. The Wow. And that becomes, Wow is pronounced oo, so that would be Shoo. Shoo. See my shoe? It's fun using the English that we already know to learn another language, like Arabic and English. Well, let's go back to our program already in progress and enjoy more about Bridge to Faith. That was Arabic and English, and now we want to talk about somebody's particular Bridge to Faith. We're here in South Africa in the state park called Little Falls. I'm Yusuf Estes, and I wanted to take this chance to tell you the story about someone who came to faith after he learned about something from the Quran. What he said was that he always wondered about believing in God, because he said, what with all the scientific study, it might indicate that there could be life on other planets. And if there were life on other planets, is this discussed in any of the holy books? And the answer he came up with was no, he didn't find that anywhere. Until he met a Muslim and he was asking the question to him. And the Muslim said, well, I never thought about that before, but let's look at it. They began reading some of the translations of what the Quran was saying. One of the things that amazed him is how the Quran itself begins. It begins by saying, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Right then and there he stopped. He said, what does that actually mean? He said, well, I think it means something like, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. All the praise is to Allah, Lord of the worlds. He said, is that Lord of the world, or is that Lord of the worlds? Worlds, it's plural, Alameen. The man stopped and he said, do you mean to tell me that 1400 years ago, living out in the desert, that Prophet Muhammad came up with something like this? Yes. Yes, that's how it is. But Muhammad didn't come up with the Quran. He is only narrating to us what he heard. And he heard this from the angel Gabriel. But how could it be? How could it be that 1400 years ago somebody is coming up with something like this? Considering, too, that Prophet Muhammad actually, he was illiterate. He didn't know how to read. He didn't know how to write. He sure didn't know anything about telescopes, space travel. This would have been preposterous to consider something like that. So how is it now? How is it that here in the Quran it's talking about the plural of the worlds? And if there was more than one world, if there was more than one race or species of people or deities out there, how would that be? Well, he has to rule out the plural deities because there could only be one God, especially it must be the one who reveals this verse, who said he's the Lord of the worlds. None of the other religions have such a thing, he said. And this, he told me personally, is how he came to faith, by understanding that the God, the Lord, the one who created everything, even provided for that. So if you ever did encounter something or somebody from another world, you already know who the Lord of the worlds is. I found that to be an amazing story. If you'd like to read more stories like that or watch other videos like this, you can visit our website at bridgetofaith.com. You're watching Bridge to Faith. We're going to be talking now about a rock. A rock. We posed the question earlier, and if God could do anything, if there was a God, and God could do anything, could he in fact make a rock so big that nothing could move it? Good question. Well, if you said yes, he could, you'd have a problem right away, because somebody'd say, okay, you're saying then that he couldn't move it either. Now you got something God can't do. He can't make the rock so big he can't move it, or he can't move a rock because he made it too big or too heavy. What are you going to say about that? Well, I found that answer myself after coming into Islam. I was amazed that Islam had answers for such questions, sometimes philosophical, sometimes a little bit silly, but still, Islam had the answer. The answer to the question, could God make a rock so big that nothing could move it, is absolutely yes, he can. That's the definitive answer, yes, because there isn't anything that God is unable to do. There are things that he restricts himself from doing. He doesn't do some things because then he wouldn't be God anymore. For instance, God would never die. God doesn't die. He's always alive. He's the eternal living. So he's not like his creation. Another thing God wouldn't do, he wouldn't lie, he wouldn't cheat, he wouldn't be unfair in his judgment, because he is the God. So he would be all truthful. Another thing is, he'd have to have full knowledge of everything that he's created. He'd be all knowledgeable. And another thing he would do, he would be the loving. For sure he'd be the loving. In the Quran of Islam, I found all of these words. Al-Wadud, it means the loving. Al-Alim, it means that he is the all-knower. Al-Hakim, he is the judge, the ultimate judge. Al-Adl, he is the fair. So he's truthful. He is the truth. He is the knowledge. But what about this rock? What about this rock? Could he make a rock so big nothing can move it? And I already said yes. How? Because we say that he created the universe and everything in it. Huwa alladhi khalaqa samawati. He is the one who created the heavens, all of the heavens. Wa fil ard, and whatever's in the earth. He is al-Khalaq, the only creator. But he's also al-Bari, the one who can change the creation and make it into other things. He could make this rock big if he wanted to, or he could make it smaller if he wanted to. And he does that, really, with the things that we see around us every day. But what about making something so big he couldn't move it? Well, the funny part about it is, you're talking about things in the creation. And Allah owns the creation. He controls the creation. And there isn't anything that he cannot do with his creation. But don't compare him to the creation. We are the ones who move stuff. Human beings and plants, animals, all the creation, we move around. Granted, plants don't move very far. They just kind of wiggle back and forth, but they move. Anything alive has some kind of movement to it. So we start estimating that God is like that. But in fact, this is not God. You don't compare him to the creation. And he doesn't move things like we do. I have to go get some kind of a lever or a stick or something and get underneath there and kind of push it and turn it and try to push it. I need a lever, a fulcrum, and a source of energy. Allah doesn't need any of that because he just speaks the word and it happens. He says be, only in Arabic it's kun. Kun fayakun, be and it is. So the answer is yes, he can make a rock so big nothing in the universe, nothing in the creation could ever move it. But he can always move it. He just says kun, be or don't be. Either way, he's in control. Makes me feel good to know that somebody's in control out there that's not like us humans. Much better. And that's a part of our Bridge to Faith. Well, for Bridge to Faith, here in South Africa, This is Yusuf Estes telling you until next time, enjoy our websites, bridgetofaith.com, ArabicandEnglish.com, oh yeah, and our science project called ScienceIslam.com. I gotta go get rid of a rock. Well, that's it for this week's episode of Bridge to Faith. Remember our website, bridgetofaith.com. Until next time, peace. Salam alaikum.